Wednesday, January 31. Has his promise failed forevermore? Read Psalm 77. What experience is the author going through? Psalm 77, beginning at verse 1. I cried out to God with my voice, and he gave ear to me. In the day of my trouble I sought the Lord. My hand was stretched out in the night without ceasing. My soul refused to be comforted. I remembered God and was troubled. I complained and my spirit was overwhelmed. Selah. You hold my eyelids open. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. I call to remembrance my song in the night. I meditate within my heart, and my spirit makes diligent search. Will the Lord cast off forever, and will he be favourable no more? Has his mercy ceased forever? Has his promise failed forevermore? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his tender mercies? Selah. And I said, This is my anguish, but I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember your wonders of old. I will also meditate on all your work and talk of your deeds. Your way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God? You are the God who does wonders. You have declared your strength among the peoples. You have with your arm redeemed your people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. Selah. The waters saw you, O God, the waters saw you. They were afraid, and depths also trembled. The clouds poured out water, the skies sent out a sound. Your arrows also flashed about. The voice of your thunder was in the whirlwind. The lightnings lit up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your way was in the sea, your paths in the great waters, and your footsteps were not known. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Psalm 77 begins with a plea to God for help that is filled with lament and painful remembering of the past in the first 6 verses. The psalmist's whole being is mournfully turned to God. He refuses to be comforted by any relief except the one coming from God. However, remembering God appears to intensify his anguish. When I remember God, I moan, in verse 3. Hebrew hammer, moan, often depicts the roar of raging waters, as we read in Psalm 46 and verse 3. Though its waters roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with its swelling. Selah. Similarly, the psalmist's whole being is in a state of intense unrest. How can remembering God produce such strong feelings of distress? A series of troubling questions betray the cause of his anguish in verses 7 to 9 of Psalm 77. Will the Lord cast off forever, and will he be favourable no more? Has his mercy ceased forever? Has his promise failed forevermore? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his tender mercies? Selah. Has God changed? Can God possibly betray his covenant? The stark contrast between God's saving acts in the past and God's apparent absence in the present causes the psalmist to feel abandoned by God. If God has changed, then the psalmist has no hope, a conclusion that he struggles to reject. Meanwhile, the psalmist cannot sleep because the Lord keeps him awake, as he says in verse 4 of Psalm 77. This recalls other biblical characters whose insomnia was providentially used by God to advance his purposes. As you read in Genesis 41, verses 1 to 8, Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine-looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. He slept and dreamed a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. And then in Esther chapter 6 verse 1 we read, "That night the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king." And Daniel 2, verses 1 to 3. Now in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said to them, "I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream." The long, sleepless night causes the psalmist to consider the Lord's past acts of deliverance, but with new resolve. We read in Psalm 77 verse 5, "I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times," and verse 10, "And I said, this is my anguish, but I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High." The assurance that the psalmist receives from God does not consist of explanations about his personal situation, but rather a confirmation of God's faithfulness and trustworthiness, like Job. The psalmist is encouraged to wait on the Lord in faith, knowing that he is the same God who performed miracles in Israel's past, which he expressed in verses 11 to 18. The psalmist also realizes that your footsteps were not known in verse 19, recognizing God's guidance even in situations in which his presence is not obvious to human eyes. The psalmist acknowledges that God is simultaneously revealed and hidden, and so he offers praise to the Lord's mysterious and sovereign ways. And so to finish today, think about past times when the Lord worked in your life. How can that truth help you deal with whatever you are facing now? This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harrold for Christian Services for the Blind. Sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia, this podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. And you can listen and watch at the same time on YouTube. Remember, God is always faithful.